They shut the door on her like she didn't belong to the same sunrise as them. And by the time the first light touched the rooftops, that mistake would weigh heavier than any gun in the territory. The night air in Dry Creek carried that dry November bite that slipped through denim and settled into bone, the kind of cold that made even the toughest ranch hands pull their collars higher and stay close to lantern light. Inside the saloon, laughter rolled like loose marbles across wooden floors, glasses clinked, boots scraped, and someone played a slow tune on an out-of-tune piano. But outside, under the weak glow of a single oil lamp, she stood alone. She couldn't have been more than 20, maybe younger. Long black hair braided with small turquoise beads that caught what little light there was. A simple wool dress, dust along the hem from walking miles of hard frontier road. She hadn't asked for much. Just water. Maybe a place near the stove until morning. The owner never even looked her in the eye. Just jerked his thumb toward the street and said they were closed to her kind tonight. The door swung shut. The iron latch dropped with a sound that felt final. For a long moment, she didn't move. Didn't knock. Didn't argue. Just stood there like she had expected it. Across the street, leaning against a hitching post, Ethan Caldwell watched without letting it show. 34 years old. 6 feet even. Hands shaped by rope and rain and 12-hour cattle drives. He had learned a long time ago that the West had rules nobody wrote down. One of them was simple. Trouble you didn't start was trouble you didn't touch. Still, he noticed things. The way she stayed standing instead of sitting in the dirt. The way her shoulders stayed straight. The way she didn't look back at the door again. Dignity, his father used to call that. Worth more than gold if a person could hold on to it. A gust of wind pushed down the empty street, carrying the smell of horse sweat and mesquite smoke. Somewhere a screen door banged. A dog that had been barking suddenly went quiet. Ethan pushed off the post, walked halfway across the street, then stopped like a man remembering his own advice. He didn't say a word, just set his canteen on the edge of the boardwalk railing about 10 feet from her and stepped back again. Close enough she'd see it. Far enough not to make a show of it. She noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes moved once toward the canteen, then toward him. Dark eyes. Calm eyes. Not surprised. Not grateful. Just aware. She gave the smallest nod a person could give without making it a moment. He tipped his hat once. That was all. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost began to form along the edges of the water trough. Upstairs windows went dark one by one. Midnight came quiet and slow. Around 2 in the morning, Ethan's horse shifted in the hitch line and gave a low, uneasy breath. He frowned slightly. The animal was steady, not the kind to spook at shadows. Then he heard it. So faint most men would have missed it. A rhythm carried through miles of open land. Not fast. Not loud. Just steady. Hoofbeats. More than a few. He glanced toward the dark horizon beyond the last building. Nothing yet. Just black distance and cold stars. Still, he didn't go back to sleep. The sound stayed at the edge of hearing like distant thunder that never turned into a storm, a low rolling rhythm that only the patient noticed, and Ethan Caldwell had always been a patient man. He rested one boot on the bottom rail of the hitching post and pretended to study the frost forming along the ground while his ears did the real work. The girl had moved closer to the canteen now. Not rushed. Not desperate. Careful, like every motion carried meaning. She picked it up with both hands, took one small drink, then another, then closed it tightly and set it back exactly where he had left it. Not an inch different. Respect returned for respect. That told him more about her than any introduction could have. The oil lamp above the saloon door flickered as the fuel ran low, throwing long shadows that stretched across the empty street like dark fingers. Most of Dry Creek was asleep now. A few snores leaked through thin hotel walls. Somewhere a loose shutter tapped in the wind. The kind of silence that only frontier towns knew, where nothing moved unless it had a reason. Ethan noticed her necklace when she stepped into the weak light again. A small cluster of turquoise stones wrapped in silver wire. Old work, careful work. Not decoration. Identity. He had seen pieces like that once before when he had delivered cattle south near Apache territory. Family markers. Protection symbols. The kind given to someone who mattered. His jaw tightened slightly. This was no lost traveler. This was someone people would come looking for. As if answering the thought, his horse shifted again, ears forward now, body angled toward the open prairie instead of the barn. Animals always knew first. Ethan trusted that more than talk. He walked slowly toward his saddle, resting one hand against the leather just to feel the animal's tension. The horse gave a soft breath through its nose, not fear, just awareness. The same feeling was beginning to settle into Ethan's chest. Not danger. Not yet. Just change coming down the road. The girl spoke then, her voice quiet but steady, shaped by an accent that carried both strength and music. You heard them too. Ethan did not pretend otherwise. Yes. She studied the dark horizon like she was reading something written there. They ride through the night when family is waiting. He nodded once. That matched what he knew. No wasted movement. No wasted words. After a moment he asked, "How far?" She answered without hesitation. Maybe 15 miles when the moon was high. Ethan calculated without thinking, at a steady pace that meant they would arrive near dawn. He looked up at the stars. Still hours away. Plenty of time for a town to keep sleeping in ignorance. You afraid? He asked after a while. She considered the question like it deserved honesty. No. Then after a pause she added, they taught me not to be. A stronger gust of wind rolled down the street, lifting dust into small spirals that vanished as quickly as they formed. The girl pulled her shawl tighter, but never stepped toward the door that had been closed on her. Ethan noticed that too. Some people begged to be let back in. Some people remembered who they were. From somewhere far out in the dark came that sound again. Clearer now. Not many riders. Many horses. Enough to change how morning would feel when it arrived. The hours between night and morning stretched long and thin like wire pulled tight, the kind of time where small things began to matter more than big ones. Ethan noticed the frost creeping higher along the wooden posts, turning rough, grain-pale silver. He noticed how the last lamp inside the saloon finally went dark, leaving only moonlight and starlight to hold the town together. He noticed how the girl never once asked to come inside again. That stayed with him most. People who begged usually had nowhere else to stand. People who waited usually knew something others did not. Around 3 in the morning, a window above the general store opened 2 inches, just enough for curious eyes to look out. Someone else had heard it now. That distant rhythm rolling across the land. One rider could pass unnoticed. 3 might be travelers. But this was different. This was many. The girl shifted her weight slightly, boots crunching softly against frozen dirt. She seemed to measure the distance with her eyes, the same way a rancher might study weather coming over hills. Ethan finally asked, "What is your name?" She looked at him fully for the first time. "Nayeli," she said. The name sat quiet in the air, strong but simple. "Ethan Caldwell," he answered. She gave a small nod like she would remember it. Another long silence followed, not uncomfortable, just honest. Then she said something that made him study her more carefully. "My grandmother said a town shows its heart after midnight." Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. What did she mean? Nayeli glanced toward the closed saloon door, then toward his canteen, still resting where she had placed it back. She said some doors close because of fear. Some stay open because of courage. You learn who lives inside by which they choose. Ethan did not answer right away. He had lived in enough towns to know she was right. A faint glow began touching the far horizon now. Not sunrise yet, just the promise of it. The cold reached its deepest point. Even the wind seemed to pause like the world was holding its breath. Then came another change. Not sound this time. Feeling. The kind that moved through a place before events did. Ethan noticed 3 more windows quietly lift. A curtain move. Someone stepping onto a balcony pretending to check the weather. The town was waking early without meaning to. Nayeli touched the turquoise beads at her throat, just once. Like someone remembering a lesson. Ethan saw that too. "Family?" he asked. She answered simply, "Yes." He hesitated before asking the next question. "Important family?" Her eyes softened just a little. "All family is important." Then after a moment she added, "But some carry responsibility." The meaning settled heavy in the cold air. From the prairie came the sound again, no longer faint, no longer distant. Hoofbeats layered over hoofbeats, steady as a heartbeat, patient as time. No shouting, no rushing, just certainty moving closer mile by mile. Ethan adjusted his coat, but did not move away. Nayeli stood straight beside the empty street, like she had been standing there her whole life. The first thin line of sunrise began to paint the rooftops in pale gold, and with it came the understanding that Dry Creek was about to learn something it had forgotten. Morning came slow and honest across Dry Creek. The kind of sunrise that showed every crack in a building and every mistake a man hoped daylight would forget. The first real light spilled over the eastern ridge and touched the tops of the hitching rails, then the rooftops, then finally the empty street where Nayeli still stood. She had not moved more than a few feet all night. Ethan respected that. Strength on the frontier was often quiet like that. A door creaked open behind him, and old Martha Green stepped out of the boarding house wrapped in a thick shawl, her gray hair still pinned from sleep. She stopped when she saw Nayeli. Her face did not show cruelty, just the tired caution of someone who had seen too many hard winters. "She out here all night?" Martha asked softly. Ethan answered without taking his eyes off the horizon. "Yes, ma'am." Martha looked at the girl a long moment, then back toward the saloon door, then back again. Something like disappointment crossed her face. She nodded once to herself and went back inside without another word. Small judgments like that mattered more than loud ones. More windows open now, more faces watching. The town pretending this was ordinary morning business. Nayeli spoke again, her voice calm like someone describing weather. "They will not come fast." Ethan gave a slight nod. "Why is that?" She answered, "Because rushing is for fear. They are not afraid." That sentence settled deep. Ethan had known men like that. The kind who did not hurry because they did not need to. The hoofbeats were clear now. Not loud, just many, like rain beginning on a distant roof. A young stable boy named Thomas stepped into the street carrying a bucket, then froze when he heard it too. "Mr. Caldwell, you hear that?" Ethan answered quietly. "Yes." The boy swallowed hard. "That sounds like a lot." Ethan did not answer that part. Nayeli crouched slowly and touched the frozen ground with her fingertips like she was greeting an old friend. Then she stood again and adjusted the small turquoise necklace at her throat. Ethan noticed the way the morning light caught the stones. Real turquoise. Old silver. Not something traded lightly. A marker of belonging. The sound grew stronger. Dust began to appear far down the road like a pale ribbon stretching toward town. Sheriff Walter Briggs finally stepped out of his office, suspenders hanging loose, hat not yet on his head. He looked annoyed more than concerned. "What is all this noise before breakfast?" he muttered. Then he saw Nayeli. His expression hardened. "You still here?" Nayeli met his eyes without challenge. "Yes." The sheriff glanced toward Ethan. "You planning to make this your problem, Caldwell?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, sir. That was the truth. This was never his story." The sheriff snorted and reached for his coffee tin, trying to pretend the growing sound meant nothing. Then the first riders appeared on the far rise. Just shapes at first, dark against gold morning light. Then more shapes behind them. Then more. Horses moving at a steady walk. No shouting. No weapons raised. Just arrival. The kind that spoke for itself. The stable boy stepped backward. Martha Green opened her window again. Someone whispered a prayer. Nayeli did not smile. Did not wave. She simply breathed easier, like someone who knew the night was officially over. Ethan tipped his hat slightly toward her, not as a gesture of protection, but of recognition. Out here, sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was simply stand long enough for the truth to arrive. The riders did not slow as they came down the long slope toward Dry Creek, their horses moving in quiet discipline, leather saddles creaking softly, reins held with the easy confidence of men who had spent their lives on open land. Ethan counted without meaning to. 10, then 20, then more shapes forming behind them through the pale dust. Not a charge, not a threat, just presence. That was what made it heavier. By the time the first group reached the edge of town, the street had filled with the sound of breathing horses and the soft metal rhythm of tack shifting with each step. No one spoke. Not the riders. Not the townspeople. Even Sheriff Briggs forgot his coffee halfway to his mouth. The lead rider raised one hand slightly, and the entire line came to a stop like a single thought had passed through all of them at once. Ethan had seen cattle drives with less order. The man at the front swung down from his saddle in one smooth motion. Tall, broad shoulders, hair tied back with a simple leather band. His coat carried the dust of many miles, but his posture carried something older than distance. Authority without needing to show it. His eyes moved across the street once. Measuring. Not angry. Not searching. Just confirming what he already knew. Then his gaze found Nayeli. Everything about his face changed in that 1 second. Not softness. Something deeper. Recognition. He walked toward her without hurry, boots sounding firm against the frozen ground. When he stopped in front of her, he did not reach for her shoulders or pull her close. He simply placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. She answered the same way. No words, just respect. Ethan understood then. This was family that did not need to prove itself loudly. Behind the first rider, more men dismounted. Then more. Horses filling both sides of the street now, easily more than 100 head, maybe closer to 200. Different colors. Paint. Chestnut. Black. Gray. Each animal calm. Trained. Waiting. Martha Green stepped fully outside now, hands folded tight in her shawl. Young Thomas stood frozen beside the stable door. Sheriff Briggs cleared his throat, but said nothing. The lead rider finally spoke, his voice deep and even, shaped by someone used to being heard without raising it. My sister walked this road yesterday. No accusation, just fact. His eyes moved once toward the saloon door, then back to Nayeli. She did not arrive home. Nayeli answered quietly, I am here. A small breath seemed to leave his chest, not relief exactly, just confirmation. Then he asked, were you treated with respect? The street seemed to hold its breath. Nayeli did not rush her answer. She glanced once toward Ethan, once toward the closed saloon, then back to her brother. I was treated as I needed to be. The answer was careful, protective, strong. The man studied her face a long moment, then nodded slowly like he understood more than she said. He turned then, finally looking fully at the town. Not with anger, not with pride, just with the weight of someone representing more than himself. We came because she matters, he said simply. No threats followed. No demands. Just truth spoken plainly in morning light. Ethan felt something shift in the street then. Not fear. Understanding. Sometimes justice arrived not with noise, but with the simple reminder that every person belonged to someone. No one moved for several long seconds after the words settled into the cold morning air, and in that silence Dry Creek began to understand that this was not a visit meant to frighten them. It was a visit meant to remind them. The Apache leader stepped slowly toward the center of the street, his boots leaving shallow prints in the frost, his presence steady like a fence post that had survived many storms. He stopped near the saloon steps and looked at the closed door, then at the faces watching from windows and porches. When he spoke again, his voice carried no anger, only the weight of expectation. In our land, he said, when a traveler asks for water, we remember they carry a long road behind them. No one answered. Sheriff Briggs finally adjusted his hat and tried to find his authority again. Now listen here, he began, but the words did not carry the strength they usually did. The Apache leader did not interrupt him. He simply waited. That waiting did more than any argument could have. Briggs cleared his throat again and changed his tone. Nobody meant trouble, he said. Town rules is all. The leader nodded once. Rules show what a town protects. That sentence stayed hanging between them. Ethan saw Briggs glance toward the saloon owner, a thick man now standing halfway behind his own door, suddenly unsure where to put his hands. Nayeli remained still beside her brother, her posture straight, her expression calm, not asking for anything, not accusing anyone. That seemed to matter. Most. The leader reached slowly into his coat and removed something small wrapped in soft leather. He opened it carefully and revealed a thin silver bracelet set with a single turquoise stone. He held it up just enough for Nayeli to see. You dropped this on the South Trail last winter, he said quietly. I kept it until I could return it. Nayeli accepted it with both hands, her eyes softening just slightly. You always find what is lost, she answered. He gave the smallest hint of a smile. Then he turned back to the town. Last night something else was lost. The meaning needed no explanation. Martha Green stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Her voice carried the firmness of someone who had buried a husband and raised children through drought years. A person should have been offered a chair, she said simply. The saloon owner shifted uncomfortably. Ethan noticed that no one laughed this time. No one made excuses. The weight of 200 quiet horses behind the Apache riders said enough about consequences without anyone needing to name them. The leader placed one hand gently on Nayeli's shoulder, not to guide her away yet, just to stand with her. Respect travels farther than fear, he said. That is why we came riding before sunrise. He paused, letting the words settle. And that is why we will leave the same way. No threats, no demands, just a lesson delivered in plain daylight. Ethan felt something settle in his chest then, something rare on the frontier. Not victory, not defeat, something better. Understanding earned without a single harsh word. Around him the town seemed smaller somehow, not from shame, but from realizing how large the world really was beyond their one street. The morning light grew warmer as the sun lifted another inch above the ridge, turning frost into thin threads of water that slipped down the wooden posts and disappeared into the dust. No one rushed to speak. No one rushed to leave. The kind of moment where a town decided what kind of place it wanted to be without saying it out loud. The Apache leader stepped back toward his horse, but did not mount yet. Instead, he studied the street one last time, as if memorizing it. Ethan noticed that too. Men who carried responsibility always remembered the places where lessons were given. Nayeli slipped the silver bracelet back onto her wrist beside the turquoise beads, her fingers moving slowly, almost ceremonial. The morning light caught the stone and sent a brief flash of blue across the quiet street. Her brother saw it and gave a small approving nod. "Grandmother would be pleased you kept it," he said softly. Nayeli answered. "Grandmother said we carry our stories where others can see them." The leader allowed himself a faint smile at that. Sheriff Briggs shifted his weight again, finally removing his hat completely, something Ethan had never seen him do without reason. He cleared his throat and spoke with less command than usual. "If there was misunderstanding," he began, choosing each word carefully, "then this town can do better." It was not an apology, but it was as close as pride would allow. The Apache leader accepted it with a single nod. Doing better is how strong towns are made. That answer gave Briggs somewhere to stand. Martha Green stepped forward again, this time holding something wrapped in cloth. She stopped a few feet from Nayeli and held it out with both hands. "Fresh bread," she said. "Still warm." Nayeli accepted it the same way she had taken the bracelet, with both hands, with respect given back. "Thank you," she said simply. "No more needed." The stable boy Thomas gathered enough courage to step forward next, holding the reins of Ethan's horse which had drifted slightly. "Mr. Caldwell said you stood all night," he told Nayeli. "That takes grit." Nayeli looked at the boy and gave a small nod. Standing is sometimes the only thing a person can do. The boy seemed to carry that sentence like a new tool he did not know he needed. The Apache riders began mounting again, one by one, movements smooth and practiced. Leather shifted. Hooves stamped softly. No hurry. No show. Just departure beginning the same way arrival had. Nayeli paused before joining them. She turned once toward Ethan and walked the few steps toward where his canteen still rested on the railing. She picked it up, brushed away the thin dust that had settled, and handed it back to him directly this time. "You saw me," she said. Ethan held her gaze and answered in the only honest way he knew. "You were there to be seen." She considered that, then nodded once. "That is rare." Her brother watched the exchange, but said nothing. Some things did not require comment. Nayeli stepped back toward her horse, placing one foot in the stirrup, then stopping for just a second to look at the street again. Not with anger, not with triumph, just memory. Then she mounted in one easy motion. The leader raised his hand once more, and the line began to turn toward the open prairie. Horses moving together like a single long breath being released. And as they began to ride out, Ethan understood something simple and lasting. Sometimes the West did not change through force. Sometimes it changed because someone chose to stand, and someone else chose to notice. The sound of departing horses lingered long after the last rider had passed the edge of town, the steady rhythm fading into the open land until it became part of the wind again. Dust hung in the air for a few quiet minutes like the memory of something important, then slowly settled back onto the street, onto the hitching rails, onto the boots of the people who had just witnessed something they would talk about for years. No one spoke right away. Even Sheriff Briggs kept his voice to himself, watching the empty road like he was trying to understand how a morning could feel so different from the one he expected. Ethan rested his forearms on the top rail and watched until the last shape disappeared into the distance. Only when they were completely gone did the town begin to breathe again. Martha Green was the first to move. She turned toward the saloon owner with a look that carried more weight than any argument. "A town gets measured by how it treats the tired," she said plainly. The man shifted his stance and looked down at his boots, suddenly more interested in dust than in defending himself. "Maybe I judged too fast," he admitted quietly. No one mocked him. That was new. Thomas the stable boy looked up at Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell," he asked, You think they will come back? Ethan considered the question before answering. Not unless they need to. The boy nodded slowly like he understood that meant something good. Nayeli's footprints were still visible near the boardwalk, small marks pressed into the thin morning mud where frost had melted. Martha noticed them too and said softly, "Some people leave tracks. Some leave reminders." The sheriff finally spoke again, his tone less sharp than before. "We keep order here," he said, though now it sounded more like a promise than a warning. Ethan gave a slight nod. "Order starts with how you see folks." That sentence stayed between them without argument. The saloon door opened again a few minutes later, not with force this time, just a slow swing on its hinges. The owner stepped outside holding a small wooden chair. He set it beside the wall near where Nayeli had stood. No announcement, no explanation, just a chair where there had been none. Martha noticed and gave the smallest approving nod. The sun climbed higher, warming the boards, turning the last patches of frost into clear drops that vanished into the thirsty ground. Normal sounds began returning. A hammer from the far end of town. A wagon rolling somewhere. The ordinary business of living. But something had shifted underneath it. Ethan picked up his saddlebag and prepared to head toward his own spread 5 miles north. But before he mounted, he looked once more at the chair against the saloon wall. A simple thing. Cheap wood. But it meant the street remembered. As he swung into the saddle, he realized something else. No threats had been spoken. No punishment given. Yet everyone stood a little straighter. Thought a little longer. That was how real lessons worked out here. Not carved into law. Carved into memory. Ethan tipped his hat once toward the empty road, and then toward the town behind him. Some mornings changed nothing. Others reminded people who they could still choose to become. By late afternoon, the street looked the way it always had. Wagons passing slow, boots crossing boardwalks, the smell of coffee drifting from open doors, but anyone who had stood there that morning could still feel the difference like a stone in their pocket. Ethan Caldwell rode north at an easy pace, his horse moving steady along the narrow trail that cut through sage and dry grass, the town shrinking behind him with every quarter mile. He did not look back right away. Men who lived alone learned not to. But after about a mile, he slowed and turned slightly in the saddle, just enough to see Dry Creek sitting quiet under the wide sky. Nothing dramatic. No sign anything had happened. Just a small frontier town, trying to become a little better than it had been the day before. He nodded once to himself and faced forward again. By the time he reached his ranch gate near sunset, the sky had turned that deep copper color that came before cold nights. His cattle moved slow near the fence line. A hawk circled high above. Ordinary things. Honest things. He unsaddled his horse, brushed the dust from its back, and poured fresh water into the trough. Routine gave a man time to think. As he worked, he found himself remembering the way Nayeli had stood without anger. The way her brother had spoken without threats. The way 200 riders had shown strength without needing to prove it. That was the part that stayed with him. Not the number of horses. Not the silence. The dignity. A few days later, a supply wagon from Dry Creek stopped by his place. The driver handed Ethan a small wrapped parcel. From Martha Green, the man said. Inside was a fresh loaf of bread and a short note written in careful script. It read, "Some lessons are worth keeping warm." Ethan allowed himself a small smile and placed the note inside the drawer where he kept important things. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the prairie in December, turning the land quiet again. One evening as Ethan closed his barn doors, he noticed something tied to the post. A thin leather cord with a single turquoise bead. No message. No name. He did not need one. He held it a long moment before tying it beside his own saddle strap. Not a trophy. A reminder. Years later, folks in Dry Creek would still talk about the morning the riders came. Not because anyone was hurt. Not because anyone was punished. Because everyone remembered how easily it could have gone another way. The chair outside the saloon stayed there. No one ever said why. Travelers used it. Old men used it. Sometimes it stayed empty, catching sunlight. But no one removed it. And if a stranger ever asked for water after a long ride, someone always found a cup. Out on the frontier, people liked to say justice came from the fastest gun. But the older ones knew better. Sometimes justice came from who showed up. Sometimes it came from who stood their ground. And sometimes it came from the simple truth that every person out there belonged to someone who would ride through the night just to make sure they were treated like they mattered. And long after the hoofprints were gone, that was the part nobody forgot.